Hola, buenos días o buenas noches, según corresponda. Yo soy Horacio Pérez y os doy la bienvenida al podcast Investigando la Investigación, el podcast donde hablaremos sobre temáticas muy relevantes dentro del mundo de la investigación, como en qué temas actuales y de impacto se está investigando en todo el mundo, cómo llevan a cabo su investigación los investigadores y cómo es su vida y día a día, qué les motiva a investigar y qué problemas se encuentran y resuelven para poder seguir adelante. Y además nos centraremos no solo en la investigación académica, sino también en la transferencia tecnológica y en cómo se realiza la investigación en las empresas.
Hace poco, ahora un par de semanas, Lantsoght y Rico, Massa, que son los autores del podcast PhD Talk, me hicieron una entrevista en inglés, que yo creo que fue bastante interesante, y donde estuvimos tratando temas como la carrera científica, consejos para doctorandos y un largo etcétera de otros temas relacionados principalmente con esto, con la carrera científica. Entonces hoy, en este capítulo que es más de verano, os paso directamente ese contenido para que lo escuchéis y bueno, os comento también que este contenido es en inglés, creo que es fácil de seguir. Y también os comento que a partir de ahora voy a abrir otra versión de este podcast en inglés. Os paso el enlace en las notas del episodio para que lo que podáis ver y nada, os lo paso, espero que os interese. Venga, vamos, adelante.
Hi, and welcome to the PhD Talk podcast. I am Eva, a civil engineering professor and blogger on the side.
And I'm Rico, a PhD student in civil engineering.
Join us on this podcast in which we discuss all topics related to PhD life, research mechanics, and lived experiences.
There will be interviews and discussions with guest researchers and PhD students. We hope you stick around with us on the PhD Talk podcast.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the PhD Talk podcast. This is episode 35 and today we are interviewing Dr. Horacio Pérez Sánchez, who is a professor in Spain. He's also the host of the podcast Investigando la Investigación. He is the principal investigator of the Bioinformatics and High Performance Computing Research Group at Universidad Católica San Antonio de Murcia. So with that, I would like to give a very warm welcome to Horacio today and get to our first question, which is if you could tell us a bit more about your background and your career path.
Well, thank you. First of all, thanks a lot for me visiting your podcast. I think you are doing a great job. All the views you do for the PhD students, you do very interesting interviews. So congratulations for the great show.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. And about my background, I come from computational chemistry. I'm chemist by background. Then I switched to computational chemistry. And then I went into computers because I realized I was very bad at the wet lab. It's something usual in our community. And then I did a PhD in computational chemistry. It was not on computational drug discovery, which is my main research line now. I work on the simulation of macromolecular systems. Then when I finished my PhD, I went to Germany. I spent 4 years at the Karlsruhe Institute of Germany, of Technology, and then I switched completely my career. Let's say the main introduction. And after 4 years in Germany, I went back to Spain. I spent 2 years as a postdoc, as a second postdoc at the University of Murcia. And then I got a position at Universidad Católica de Murcia as principal investigator. And since 2013, I'm leading this group. And we focus on the development of computational drug discovery methods on high-performance computing architectures. That's more or less a quick introduction.
Thank you.
So I'm very excited to interview you today because I know very little about bioinformatics and high-performance computing and how those two things combine together. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about your research, a bit about what bioinformatics is, and perhaps as a first question, how did you arrive at that as a career path? You said that you realized you weren't so good in the wet lab, and what made you make the switch to more computer simulations and using high performance computing to solve these biological and chemical problems?
Yeah, okay. It was quite easy for me because when I studied chemistry, I think second year, I realized I was very bad at the wet lab, and I liked a lot computers, physics, equations, theory, computations, and so on and so forth. So I mean, it was a no-brainer. I decided to switch and to avoid the lab as much as possible. Then I followed my path. So it was not something that I realized at the last minute. I mean, it was something like at the second year of my bachelor in sciences. And then I followed that direction. And because that during our degree, we need to specialize in some, you can go basically to experimental chemistry or computational chemistry. Almost nobody goes for computational chemistry. I decided to go into that direction. I would say we were, like 10% of the students comparing everything. I mean, everybody said, don't go that direction. But sometimes I think it's more important to do what you really like, what you really enjoy. So I went that direction, for good or for bad. I don't know. I went that direction. And then I did my PhD in some specific topic, which is computational simulations of macromolecules. Then you ask, what is bioinformatics? Okay, that's a tricky question. Bioinformatics can be something like the study of biosystems, like proteins, DNA, sugars, lipids, and so on and so forth, with computers. That's basically okay. That will be kind of the main idea, but this idea is kind of complicated because there are different sub areas, and different people have different views about what bioinformatics is. In practice, bioinformatics is now, this is a very rough definition, but this is kind of the study of DNA sequences. The genome project, all these things, this is the real bioinformatics. What we do is something different because we study how the structure of molecules affects their properties. And this is structural bioinformatics. Okay, so we need to make the difference, the kind of north and south. North or south will be sequence bioinformatics, and the other one will be structural bioinformatics. Okay, and my field as chemist is structural bioinformatics. People from biology go more for sequence bioinformatics. That's kind of a rough the definition. And then you said, why high performance computing? What is that? Okay, because you need to perform such quantity of computations that you need to access, let's say, a supercomputer. Otherwise, it is not possible. So mostly you need this kind of computational resources.
So thank you so much for remembering all of my rambling questions there. You could tell I have a lot of questions about this field. So if we focus in on the structural bioinformatics part of it, what about the structure of these molecules? Why does the study of that require so much computing?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Yeah,
that's a very good question. I mean, because reality is very complex, and we could say that when you study the interactions between a drug, which can be a very small molecule, and a protein, which can be usually a much bigger molecule, there is a lot of interactions between the atoms that form the molecules, and we apply physics first in order to decompose the energetic interactions. And to summarize, there is really a lot of potential interactions that each single atom of a ligand or from a small molecule can perform with any other atom from the protein, which can have 10,000 of atoms. So you need to compute a lot, and this is for a single. When a drug interacts with a protein, there is an approximation in the space. The ligand goes into the protein. So for each step, you need to perform double loops of computations, a lot of things, usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have a protein, which is obviously a huge molecule, many, many thousands of atoms, as you said, and then a drug, which will be a little bit smaller. And so the way the drug approaches the protein, and I guess also probably its orientation and the where it approaches it from, and then all these atoms, and there could be thousands of them, are interacting in different ways, and they have many possibilities for interaction.
Yes.
And so that's what makes this a computational
Yeah,
I was going to say nightmare, but that's what makes it interesting computationally, I guess, is that there's so many possibilities.
exactly. This is what you said. This is what you said. But then there is some other detail, and I will not give more details because this is there is a lot of things. But for each of these kind of calculations, you can apply different levels of theory. I mean, there is one which is very easy, which is kind of cheap, which is let's say, in order to summarize, it's called molecular mechanics, where you follow the kind of forces and so on and so forth. But if you want to get more accuracy, you need to go to quantum physics, and then things get weird because the computations are unbelievably expensive. Okay, nowadays, let's be real, they cannot be applied in practice at its full splendor. It's very hard. So you usually need to choose which level of theory you want to use. Yeah.
I understand. Okay, so all right. So after this PhD is done, I'm gonna have to go start another one because this is this is super interesting. Thank you so much for giving us a very brief overview of this.
And that does tie in with my curiosity question on really the infrastructure that you use in terms of supercomputers. Is then, do you have for your lab your own supercomputer, or is that of your university, like a computing center? What do you use, and what does it do in terms of performance?
That's a very good question. We have very small supercomputing systems where we perform the kind of first proof tests or test drives. In order to compile the code, in order to check that the computational code that we develop works at a very small scale, okay? But then when we need to run full simulations, it depends on the case. But in our university, we don't have a local supercomputer. We don't have. So how do we do it? We apply. There are a lot of calls for supercomputing resources in Spain, in Europe, in the USA, as far as I know, in other countries. So if you collaborate, for instance, let's suppose some time ago we collaborate with some group in the United States. So we submit a project proposal, and then you can get easy access to such resources. But at our university, well, we don't have.
I think this ties in very well with what we have as our next question. And that one is really more on the methods that you have used for your research. And the background to this is that we've done recently a couple of interviews with people who use qualitative methods. So we have added in here as well a question for you to tell our listeners what type of methods that you use. And we already understood that, of course, your methods are by and large numerical, but perhaps you can say a little bit about what that entails in times of usage and the practicalities of it.
Practicalities. Okay, so it depends a lot because depending on the level of theory that you are using, okay, but let's go to the practice. Forget about numbers, theory, and so on and so forth. In a practical drug discovery project, you basically identify on a disease, there is some protein that you want to interfere, some protein that you want to block, and then you process a library of 1 million of compounds against that protein in order to check if some of those 1 million ligands can block that protein, okay? That takes usually using one of the most known computational drug discovery techniques, which is called docking, molecular docking. That can take on average 5 minutes per ligand, per molecule on a single CPU, okay? So if you want to screen 1 million of compounds on a single computer, I don't have the numbers right now in my head, but let's suppose, I don't know, some months, just your laptop at a full speed, okay? But of course, you go to a supercomputer, and then from our experience, it will depend also on the resources that you have on the supercomputer, because in order to make a very, very brief summary of a supercomputer, it's like it depends on the number of processors or the number of cores. A typical supercomputer can have 1 million of cores, but you don't have access to all of them. You can have access, usually in our case, to 10,000 cores. So you submit the calculation to all these 10,000 cores, and probably, I don't know, in a matter of days, you can have the results. 4 days, 5 days for a million of compounds. I don't know if this is gives a picture of...
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
I've heard about, I want to use the word swarm computing, where you basically, somebody at home with their laptop, let's say, or their desktop computer, when they're not using it, you can donate its computational power to like a system. Have you taken advantage of that at all?
We know. This is a very good idea. It became very famous, I would say, 15 years ago. And it's also used at the moment. But let me tell you first how it was 15 years ago. Like you said, you need to install some software on your computer. When you are not using the computer, your computer becomes kind of a client or part of the swarm, as you said, from the main node. The main node orchestrates all the calculations. It receives the million of compounds and it calls all the potential customers, clients, in order to check if they are available or not. If they are available, then it checks how powerful they are in terms of computational power, and then it sends a lot of calculations, okay? So the technical idea is good, but it has the following problems. I would say that 15 years ago, people didn't use as much as today the computers, so they were either more often, okay? First. Second, before they were just, 10 or 15 very, very important projects that use these resources. One of them, I don't remember the name, it was something called like SETI at home. It was some software that analyzed information about galaxies, about astronomical data in order to detect extraterrestrial signals. I don't know exactly how it works or something. But then the next hit was some software in order to simulate how proteins fold. This software, by the way, was installed by default on the PlayStation 3 video game console. You could also use it, But this is a very good idea. It worked during that time. But later, first, there was a big competition because anybody could create a project like this. So a lot of people creating projects. So there was a fierce competition. And second, the winner was, you have an idea, you have the server, but you need to attract people to use these resources. So it became kind of a social network capability. You need to do good marketing in order to attract people. And scientists usually are not very good at this.
Sure.
And later, I would say 2012, 2013, you remember, it started the Bitcoin revolution, and people decided, what can I do? To mine Bitcoin or to contribute to science? So,
there we go.
Exactly. So nowadays, it's a movement, it's going on, it still continues, but not as strong as 15 years ago.
Well, there you go. That's interesting. Thank you for that. You seem to have a lot of background knowledge on that, so that was good to get updated on what that looks like right now. So in that case, our next question for you is a little bit about the PhD trajectory and the journey to getting a PhD. And Eva and I are both wondering if you could give us some background on what that looks like at your university and or in Spain in general.
In our university, it's the same as in Spain, because it is regulated. In all universities. I really don't know in other countries, but we have kind of an organism that comes from the government, and they regulate that in all universities, all the doctorate programs need to follow some requirements. Everything needs to be very, very organized. This documentation, these rules, and so on and so forth. I guess it's the same in other countries, but I don't know if there is one organism as strict as the one we have in Spain.
In the Netherlands, what really is written in the law is not really the requirements for the PhD trajectory in itself. It gives the universities some liberty there, how they organize it. But what is written in law is who can be a promoter. And that's in the Netherlands, it's called to jus promovendi, who has the right to promote somebody to doctor. And that is something very strict in the Netherlands.
Yeah, here is the same. Exactly. So apart from that, apart from this organism, which is very strict, it's a lot of bureaucracy. Well, but apart from that, I think the regulations are the same in all the universities. As you said, Eva, a PhD supervisor needs to have some habilitation before, otherwise they cannot perform as PhD supervisors. And as per the requirements, in a very brief summary, you usually need to get 3 papers as first author in index journals from the first quartile. I mean,
Okay. Yeah.
impact factor more than 3. Well, it depends on the area. Okay, but you need to have this. This is something common in other countries. There is a new thing now in Spain. It started 6 years ago, and I think that it is the industrial PhD, where there must be some project between the university and some company, so that the student performs the research both at the academia and at the company. Okay, in our university in Europe was one of the first universities that started this industrial PhD. I had 2 PhD students in that direction, and yeah, I think this is a good experience, because sometimes after the PhD, the company wants to recruit these students because they know them, they know they perform well. Nothing exceptional, but the bureaucracy. There is a lot of bureaucracy.
And in general, would you say that, well, I guess in chemistry, maybe it's different from other fields, but a PhD is 4 years or 3 years? How long would that take typically?
It depends. For instance, you need to fulfill some criteria, and depending on the school where you perform your doctoral studies, you need to go to some classes like how to write papers and a lot of different things. Okay, this usually takes, I would say, 1.5 years. I mean, this process cannot go faster. Yeah, but apart from that, if during that time you can get, I don't know, let's exaggerate, 20 papers, then you can virtually defend your PhD after 2 years. Okay, but the typical thing is that if you get funded, you get a grant, a fellowship, for usually in Spain for 4 years. But otherwise, people that don't have a fellowship, usually they have a job, so they are doing their PhD in a part-time schedule. So you have a limitation. I don't remember. I think it's 5 years or 6 years, something like that. But if you can demonstrate that you are working a lot in your daily job, and you don't have time for the PhD work, you can request an extension.
Changing a little bit of topic here, you also talk a lot with other researchers through your podcast, Investigando la Investigación. So my curiosity question here for you is, what have you learned from interviewing people and listening to their stories? What is your main takeaway from there?
Wow, that's a very good question. For me, it's really interesting because there are different studies, different styles, but at the end, I can see a common theme, which is motivation, or what you really feel. Because it's your passion, for good or for bad. It's very interesting because sometimes I interview these people and I realize about some things I didn't realize before. I mean, for instance, sometime I was interviewing a researcher, and he worked in mathematics. And in mathematics, well, like in some of the research areas, you need a lot of focus in order to develop what they call proofs. There is some mathematical theorem, and you need to demonstrate if it is valid or not, and you need a lot of focus. You cannot be interrupted. So this guy worked during the day at the university. He could not focus. So after dinner, he got a lot of coffee, drank all the coffee, and said, now I cannot sleep. The only way is to go for my proof, to demonstrate my proof. Okay, I mean, it's crazy, but you realize what people that are really motivated can do. I mean, this is not healthy. Of course, you need to sleep. Yeah, but
I'm not recommending that. Yeah.
No. I'm not recommending that. Yeah, take it with a grain of salt, of course.
Especially, I think mathematics has that reputation of being taking drastic steps, maybe.
Exactly.
Talking back more about PhD supervision, I wanted to ask you if you have some best advice for PhD supervisors.
For PhD supervisors, Okay,
Mhm.
first one would be don't take too many PhD students. Yeah, because for instance, in Spain, in order to get promoted for habilitation, there are different levels, okay? And if you want to go to the upper level, you need to get some score, and you get the score from supervising PhD students, service, papers, and so on and so forth. And you need to have from everything. So sometimes it happens that PhD supervisors get a lot of students, they don't really care at all about them, okay?
Mhm.
And at the end, this is a mess for him, for her,
Sure.
and for the students. So that will be for me the first advice. Then second, and this is something that I see very clearly sometimes, the PhD student is not a machine, is a person. And sometimes you need to understand the student as a person in order to understand his or her motivation, the problems that he or she might have. And third, it's very important to teach them how to be proactive. I see students where the supervisor doesn't have time or somehow doesn't care a lot. So then I think that from my point of view, the students should say, hey, man, you are my advisor. There is university. This can be one of these situations. Otherwise, sometimes the student is not a machine that receives orders from the supervisor and so they say, oh man, I am really inspired. I think this theory could be interesting. Even if I'm grown, I'm going to propose this to my supervisor.
Mhm.
And fourth, the supervisor should explain time management techniques sometimes. Because the
Mhm.
PhD students, the students in general, as it was my case, you finish your studies, your degree studies, and you know nothing about time management or project management. And that's very
Oh yeah.
important. That's my side, okay? I don't mean I'm right and somebody else is wrong, but this is my experience.
I think that's great advice. Yes.
From the other side of things, myself as being a PhD student, a PhD candidate, do you have any advice for PhD candidates in general?
Yeah, I'm thinking about my experience, about what I see now and when I was a PhD student. And my main problem at that time was a lack of clarity of my intention, of my objectives. I started to do my PhD because, I don't know, routine, some things happening, and I was there, okay.
Mhm.
But at some point, I decided, oh, this is what I want to do. And then I tried to visualize what I wanted to be in a time frame of 1, 5, and 10 years. It's complicated. It's complicated, and many things can happen in between. Okay, but I suggest that at least you should have a vision of what you want to do. Not to wait after you defend your PhD thesis and then you are into the void and then you don't know. Okay, I
Yeah.
I would clearly suggest to perform this thinking before. Even, of course, if you change it later, no problem at all. It will happen. But you will get used to develop a vision about things that you want to do. Okay. But I know it's complicated because I was on my PhD, I was 25, and I don't know, you usually want to do your PhD, go to parties, do sports or whatever, but that will be my main suggestion. Okay. And as I said before,
Yeah.
to be proactive, if you don't get what you are supposed to get from your supervisor, go for him, request help, and talk with him, her, about everything that you need in order to move forward. Because sometimes the supervisors, because they are in too many different projects or things, they forget about you. Not because they want to forget about you, but because things happen. So yeah, that's my point.
Great.
Mhm.
I think that's great advice.
My next question is related to the fact that academic work can creep into all hours of the day and all days of the year if you let it. So my question here for you is, how do you set boundaries to work?
Yeah, that's a good one. That's complicated. For me now, it took me a while to get into the limits, but it was easy at the same time. Let me tell you, until 2013, I basically spent all time doing my postdoc, my things, my research. I was obsessed, but at some time I decided, oh, this cannot be. I need to separate my family life, things I want to do, sports, free time, but I didn't know how. But then something happened and I have my first kid. And then everything was very easy. Was very easy because I needed to be very efficient in order to allocate time for the research, for the kid, for the family. And since then, everything is good. 6 p.m., everything is over. Everything is over. Okay, that's one of the things. It doesn't matter. Of course, exceptionally, if there is some grand submission deadline, something really, really, really exceptional, something that happens once per year. Yeah. And second, I 3 years ago, I decided to remove email from my smartphone. I don't have email. So when I am out of the office, I don't get any notification about work. Okay. I can waste my time with social networks, but anything about work. So if something good or bad, mostly bad, happens, I will get the notification later in the morning, not when I'm with my kids going around in the park. So
Sure.
that's my two productivity techniques. Not very easy to implement. It took me a lot in order to remove email from my smartphone.
I feel like a lot of people would struggle with that. What I got from this was, if you have a kid, it puts your priorities in order to make sure that you get things done within normal working hours.
Yeah.
I'll keep that in mind. That's it. So this next question is something that we've been asking all our interviewees because it's been on everybody's mind the past almost 2 years now. But how has COVID-19 changed your jobs and your daily tasks?
Well, in our case, it was not very, very hard because we are computational people. Let's suppose we were kind of organic chemist or biology. You need to be at the lab the full day doing your wet lab experiments. I know people in that situation, and it was very hard for them. But for us, was not so hard. The main problem for us was the lack of human interaction, because we perform usually a lot of meetings in order to talk about how to develop the project, how to develop the software. And when you do these meetings in person, in front of the whiteboard, it's much better. With Zoom or whatever the tool, is not the same, of course. So for me, that was the biggest change. Now we are getting back more or less to to the previous times, and I have to say that in-person meetings is something totally different, for good, but sometimes also for bad. Okay, because of course now in Spain we tend to lose a lot of time in chit chatting, and then you you arrive, you tell the jokes, you talk about football, and sometimes during Zooms it was not like that. I would say something in between would be great, but now I prefer it in person.
Our last question is a question that we ask as well to all our interviewees, and that's a curiosity question again on how a day in the life looks like for you.
Okay, so it's very easy. I think it's something very, very usual. I wake up in the morning, then I go to the office, and the first thing I do is to do a review of what I did yesterday. But let me put first. First thing I do in the morning is to plan the day. I do something like time blocking for the day, and then I say, okay, I want to do this and this and that. I put these blocks, this for meetings, this for some projects, and so on and so forth. I need to honestly tell you, I never achieve 100% efficiency, never ever.
Sure.
In the most optimistic case, probably 50% or something. Okay, and the next day, not the same day, I try to realize why I did bad at this or good at this in order to learn something, and then try to use some time management techniques. Like, this is complicated to say. Probably you heard about this GTD, getting things done, and all the kind of things. Okay, I have to say honestly, I don't understand in pure detail what GTD is, but I use 2 or 3 concepts from GTD that for me work great. Otherwise, without GTD, it will not be the same. And then some other project management techniques, because we are running a lot of projects. Each project, it's usually a little bit different, and you need to look at the different projects, sometimes even with different tools. not because your choice, because you are collaborating with these people and these other people. One of them is Trello, the other one use Asana or something else. At the end, is a mix of tools. Yeah, but it's something like that. At the end of the week, I do a weekly review in order to see what's going well, what's going bad. And first day of the week, sometimes I do this Sunday night, a planification of the things I want to get done at the end of the week. As I tell you before, I never get everything. But for me, the important thing is to think why we didn't do everything in order to get some feedback about the process, in order to eliminate waste, like they say in these lean management techniques. Yeah, so something like that.
I will make sure to add some links to all of these techniques that you mentioned in the show notes, so that our listeners can read more about those.
Of course, but I have to say just the last thing, that I'm very inefficient about this, but I honestly feel two things. If you decide to improve, at the end you get it, and then you can get two things. You improve the number of projects you can work in, or you can do the same things in less time. But at the same time, you run the risk of getting into the rabbit hole of productivity. And that can be very harmful. You start to read a lot of blogs about productivity, blah, 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 and you don't do the work. So
I feel seen.
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for being our guest today. I think I really learned a lot, and I found it very interesting. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Welcome. And thanks a lot for interviewing me. And I hope this will be useful for all the PhD students. Thanks a lot.
I am sure it will. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for listening. This was episode 35 of the PhD Talk podcast, in which we interviewed Dr. Horacio Perez Sanchez from Spain, and we talked about his research in structural bioinformatics, as well as his best tips for PhD students and supervisors, and what it's like to do a PhD in Spain. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and we will be back next week with more on PhD life and research mechanics. Thank you so much for listening.
Entonces, bueno, gracias por estar ahí y por escuchar este podcast. Os recuerdo que en las notas del episodio tenéis los detalles sobre muchas de las cosas que hemos hablado hoy, y también un formulario donde, si quieres, puedes opinar sobre el podcast, para bien o para mal, como quieras, estás en todo tu derecho, y también sugerir, si quieres, un próximo entrevistado o tema que está relacionado con la investigación, claro. Pues tu opinión me parece muy importante, tanto a mí como a toda la audiencia de este podcast que va creciendo y que va contando muchas cosas interesantes. También comentar que tenemos un grupo de Telegram, que está puesto en la nota del programa, donde te puedes unir si quieres para discutir de manera más directa, que no mediante el email, que a veces es un poco más frío, pero bueno, en ese grupo puedes comentar todas estas cosas. Y también comentar que si te interesa alguna de las técnicas de productividad que hemos mencionado hoy de manera muy breve en el podcast, en esta entrevista, bueno, me puedes contactar directamente y te puedo dar más detalles. Y por último, si te ha gustado, te agradecería muchísimo que lo recomendases a quien veas que le puede interesar, y difundirlo por las redes sociales o donde sea. Y nada, y si estás en Apple Podcast, pues ponernos ahí 5 estrellas o 4, como quieras. Siempre viene bien. Muchas gracias. Hasta luego.